When Rufus Crane saw the black-veiled figure kneeling beside his wife's weathered headstone at midnight, his first thought was that death had finally come to claim him too. The moonlight caught the edges of her habit as she swayed in silent prayer, her lips moving soundlessly over words that seemed to rise like smoke into the star-scattered Wyoming sky. Rufus pressed his back against the rough bark of the old cottonwood, his heart hammering against his ribs. 3 years he'd been coming to this hillside grave, and never once had he encountered another soul, especially not a nun. The woman's hands were folded over something pressed to her chest, a small wooden cross that caught the silver light as she rocked back and forth. Her voice, when it finally reached him, was barely a whisper carried on the night wind. "Forgive me," Nellie rose. "Forgive me for what I couldn't save." Rufus felt the ground shift beneath his boots. Nobody knew his wife's name. Not here. Not anymore. His fingers found the worn handle of the Colt at his hip, muscle memory from too many nights when strangers meant trouble. But this woman, she spoke Nellie's name like a prayer, like a confession. The kind of knowing that came from somewhere deeper than idle gossip. You can almost smell the dust settling around secrets in a place like this, where the living and the dead keep company under the same endless sky. The nun's shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. "I should have been faster. Should have known what that fever would take from her. From him." Him. Rufus stepped forward before he could stop himself, a dry twig snapping under his weight. The woman's head jerked up, and for the first time he saw her face clearly in the moonlight. She was young, too young for the grief that carved lines around her dark eyes, too young for the weight of whatever guilt she carried. "You're on private land," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She scrambled to her feet, the wooden cross clutching to her chest like armor. I didn't mean to trespass. I was just, you were praying over my wife's grave." The words came out flat, matter of fact, using her Christian name like you knew her. The nun's face went pale as fresh snow. "Your wife, Nellie Rose Crane, died 3 winters past of lung fever." He studied her face for any flicker of recognition, any tell that might explain this midnight visitation. "You want to tell me how you came to know her name?" She pressed her lips together, those dark eyes darting toward the tree-line like a spooked deer calculating escape routes. I served at the mission hospital in Cheyenne before taking my final vows." "Cheyenne's 2 days' ride from here." "She came to us," the nun whispered, "near the end, when the fever wouldn't break." Rufus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd carried Nellie to 3 different doctors that winter, each one shaking their head and sending them home with worthless tonics and empty promises. But a mission hospital. She never mentioned no hospital. "She made me promise." The words tumbled out now, like water through a broken dam. "Made me swear I wouldn't tell her husband. Said he'd already spent too much trying to save her, and there wasn't nothing more to be done anyway." The night air felt thin, hard to breathe. Rufus had spent 3 years believing he'd done everything possible, had exhausted every option. The guilt had been manageable that way. The guilt of a man who'd fought the inevitable and lost. But this, "What's your name, sister?" "Dorothea. But most folks call me Dottie." "Sister Dottie." He tasted the name, found it bitter. "You want to tell me exactly what happened in that hospital?" She shook her head, backing toward the grave marker. "I shouldn't have come. This was a mistake." "No." His voice cut through the night like a blade. "You came here for a reason. You've been carrying something for 3 years, and now you're here, praying over my wife's grave like you're the one who needs forgiving." The truth hung between them like a loaded gun. "She begged me to try an experimental treatment," Dottie whispered. "Something new from back east. But it was dangerous, and the Mother Superior said we couldn't risk it without family consent. And I gave it to her anyway." The words came out broken, barely audible. I thought I could save her. I thought God was calling me to try." Rufus stared at this slip of a woman who'd held his wife's life in her hands, who'd made a choice that should have been his to make. Did it work? For a day? Maybe 2. Tears tracked down her cheeks. Then her heart just stopped. "The treatment, the fever, I don't know which one killed her. But I killed her, Mr. Crane. I killed your wife." The silence that followed was the kind that comes before thunder, heavy and full of electricity. Rufus could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the whisper of wind through the grass growing over Nellie's grave. "Why now?" he asked. "Why come here now?" Because I'm leaving, taking my final vows next month, and I couldn't. She clutched the wooden cross tighter. I couldn't take them with this sin on my soul. So you came to confess to a dead woman. I came to ask her forgiveness. And what if she can't give it? Dottie's face crumpled. Then I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. Rufus studied her face in the moonlight. This woman who'd carried his wife's death like a stone in her chest. He thought of his 8-year-old son Levi, asleep back at the ranch, still asking when Mama was coming home. He thought of 3 years of wondering if he'd done enough, if he'd tried hard enough. Now he knew someone else had tried. Someone else had failed. You got somewhere to stay tonight, sister? The question seemed to surprise her. Aye, there's a boarding house in town. 2-hour ride in the dark. Dangerous country for a woman alone. I'll manage. Like you managed to save my wife. The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, her hand pressed to her mouth. But then Rufus saw something else in her eyes. Not just guilt, but the same desperate love that had driven him to carry Nellie from doctor to doctor, spending money he didn't have on cures that didn't work. This woman had loved his wife enough to risk everything trying to save her, but in the distance, a lone gunshot split the night. The gunshot echoed off the canyon walls like a death knell, followed by the thunder of hoofbeats and men's voices shouting orders. Rufus grabbed Dottie's arm, pulling her down behind Nellie's headstone as riders emerged from the treeline below. Asa Thornton's boys, he muttered, recognizing the harsh laugh that cut through the night air. Should have known. Who's Asa Thornton? Dottie whispered, her face pressed close to his in the darkness. Trouble with a capital T. Owns the biggest spread in 3 counties, and he's been trying to buy out every small rancher from here to the Colorado border. Rufus peered over the marble stone, including me. Below them, 5 riders circled the base of the hill, their horses snorting and pawing the ground. Asa Thornton sat tall in his saddle, a man built like a bull with silver hair and eyes that glinted like flint in the moonlight. His voice carried up the hillside with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. I know you're up there, Crane. Saw the smoke from your chimney die out an hour ago, but your horse ain't in the barn. Rufus cursed under his breath. He'd ridden up here on Dusty, his old bay gelding, and left him tied to a tree on the far side of the hill. If Thornton's men found the horse, what does he want? Dottie breathed. Same thing he's wanted for 2 years. My land. Rufus checked his Colt, counting the bullets by touch. 5 shots. 5 riders. Not odds he favored with an innocent woman to protect. You got until sunrise to reconsider my offer, Thornton called out. After that, well, accidents happen, especially to men who leave their boys alone at night. Levi, the name hit Rufus like a physical blow. His 8-year-old son, sleeping peacefully in the ranch house, trusting his papa to come home safe. The boy had already lost his mother. He couldn't lose his father too. He's threatening your child. Dottie's voice carried a sharp edge that hadn't been there before. It's what he does. Pushes until decent folks break. Rufus felt the familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. My spread sits right in the middle of his grand plans. He can't connect his northern and southern pastures without it. So he's willing to kill for it. He's willing to let other men kill for it. Keeps his own hands clean that way. The riders below began to spread out, 2 heading toward the tree line where Dusty was hidden, 2 more starting up the hill. Thornton remained in place, a general directing his troops. We need to move, Rufus said. There's a dry creek bed about 50 yards north. If we can make it there without being seen. No. Dottie's hand closed over his wrist. I won't run. Sister, this ain't the time for, those men are here because of land. Because of greed. Her dark eyes blazed with something that looked almost like fire. Your wife died because I was too proud to ask for help when I needed it. I won't let your son lose his father because I was too cowardly to stand up when it mattered. Before Rufus could stop her, she was on her feet, stepping out from behind the headstone. Her black habit made her nearly invisible against the night sky, but her voice carried clear and strong down the hillside. You men ought to be ashamed of yourselves. The riders pulled up short, their horses dancing nervously. Thornton's laugh was ugly, full of surprise and something darker. Well, looks like Crane's got himself a lady friend. Didn't know you were partial to nuns, Rufus. This is sacred ground, Dottie continued, her voice taking on the rhythm of a preacher addressing his congregation. You're disturbing the peace of the dead and threatening violence in the shadow of the cross. Sister, I respect the church and all, Thornton called back, but this is business. Man's business. Murder is God's business. The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. Even from 50 yards away, Rufus could see the way Thornton's shoulders stiffened. Nobody's talking about murder, sister. Then why are you here armed in the middle of the night? Why are you threatening a widowed father and his sleeping child? Dottie stepped closer to the edge of the hill, and Rufus felt his heart stop. If your intentions were honest, you'd conduct your business in daylight, in town, with witnesses. Lady, you don't know what you're. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Something in her voice had changed, become steel wrapped in silk. I've seen men like you before. Men who think power gives them the right to take what they want. Men who hide behind others to do their dirty work. You can almost taste the tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. One of the riders shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his gun. Rufus tensed, ready to put himself between Dottie and the bullet, but she didn't flinch. You want to know what I was doing here tonight? She continued. I was praying for the soul of Nellie Rose Crane, a woman who died because someone made a choice for her without her husband's knowledge. A woman who suffered because pride got in the way of asking for help. Rufus stared at her, understanding dawning like sunrise. She wasn't just talking about Nellie's death. She was talking about right now, about the choice he was facing. So I'll ask you again, Mr. Thornton, what are you really doing here? The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Thornton spat into the dirt and wheeled his horse around. This ain't over, Crane. Not by a long shot. Yes, it is. The new voice came from the treeline, calm and measured. A man stepped out of the shadows, tall and lean with a badge glinting on his vest. Sheriff Alma Lucille, the toughest lawman in 3 counties and the only person in the territory who didn't seem impressed by Asa Thornton's reputation. Evening, Asa. Funny thing, I was just at the telegraph office when a message came through about some rustled cattle. Seems they might have been driven through your north pasture. That's a lie. Maybe. But I reckon a judge might want to hear about it, especially if there were witnesses to tonight's little visit. Alma's eyes found Dottie standing silhouetted against the stars. Good thing we got ourselves a woman of God to testify about what she saw. Thornton's face went dark as a thundercloud. You can't prove nothing. Don't have to prove it tonight. But I can sure ask questions. Lots of questions. The kind that might interest certain folks in territorial government. The threat was clear. Thornton might own half the county, but he didn't own the law. Not yet. This ain't finished, he snarled. Then spurred his horse toward the valley. As the riders disappeared into the darkness, Rufus felt his legs give out. He sank down beside Nellie's grave, his hands shaking with delayed shock. But Sheriff Lucille was already climbing the hill, and the look on her face suggested the night's surprises were far from over. Sheriff Alma Lucille reached the top of the hill with the steady gait of someone who'd spent more nights chasing trouble than sleeping peacefully. She tipped her hat to Dottie, then fixed her steel-gray eyes on Rufus. Evening, Crane. Sister. She paused beside Nellie's headstone, her voice softening. Sorry to disturb your visit. How'd you know we were here? Rufus asked, still trying to steady his breathing. Didn't. Was tracking those rustled cattle I mentioned when I heard voices. Alma's smile was thin as a knife blade. Lucky coincidence, you might say. Or providence, Dottie murmured. Maybe both. The sheriff studied Dottie's face in the moonlight. You look familiar, sister. We met before. I don't believe so. Alma's expression remained neutral, but Rufus caught the flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or suspicion. You're a long way from any convent. I was visiting, paying respects. To a woman you never met. The question hung in the air like smoke. Dottie's fingers tightened on her wooden cross, and Rufus felt the urge to step between them. But before he could speak, Alma continued. See, that's the curious thing. Got a telegram yesterday from the Mother Superior at Sacred Heart in Cheyenne. Seems they're missing one of their novices. Young woman named Dorothea Lane. Last seen 3 days ago, right around the time someone broke into their medical supply room. Rufus felt the world tilt sideways. Broke in, took some expensive medicines. The experimental kind they use for desperate cases. Alma's voice remained conversational, but her hand rested casually on her gun belt. Funny thing is, nothing else was touched, just the medicines. Dottie's face had gone pale as moonlight. I can explain. I'm sure you can. But first, let me tell you what I think happened. Alma settled back on her heels, like a storyteller preparing for a long tale. I think a young woman's been carrying a guilty conscience for 3 years. I think she heard about some new treatments becoming available, and she thought maybe she could make amends for past mistakes. You don't understand? Dottie whispered. Oh, I understand plenty. Alma's voice hardened. I understand that Asa Thornton's been buying up land by foreclosing on medical debts. I understand that Doc Peterson in town's been charging double for his services since the cholera outbreak. And I understand that desperate people do desperate things. Rufus stared at Dottie, pieces falling into place like dominoes. You didn't come here to confess. You came here to deliver something. The treatments that might have saved her, Dottie said, her voice barely audible. They're available now. Proven safe. I thought maybe I could help other families avoid what happened to yours. By stealing from the church. By taking what should have been freely given. Fire flashed in her dark eyes. Do you know how many people have died because they couldn't afford medicine? How many children have been orphaned because their parents couldn't pay a doctor's bills? That doesn't make theft right, Alma said quietly. Doesn't it? Dottie turned to face her fully. When the church sits on supplies that could save lives while people suffer. When men like Thornton profit from others' misery. The silence that followed was heavy with moral weight. Rufus found himself thinking of the money he'd spent trying to save Nellie, the debts he'd accumulated, the second mortgage on the ranch that Thornton was now trying to collect. There's something else, Alma said finally. Got word from the territorial marshal. Seems there's been a string of medical supply thefts across 3 states. Always the same pattern. Expensive medicines taken, nothing else touched. Always someone matching your description seen in the area. I've been trying to help people. By breaking the law. By doing what the law won't do. Dottie's voice rose with passion. By making sure children don't die because their parents can't afford to save them. Rufus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of the same desperate love he'd felt watching Nellie waste away. How many people have you helped? 17 families. Maybe 18, if young Tommy Morrison pulls through his fever. And how many laws have you broken? Does it matter? She met his eyes directly. If breaking an unjust law saves a child's life, isn't that a choice worth making? You can almost feel the weight of moral decisions pressing down like storm clouds, heavy and full of consequence. It matters to me, Alma said, because I took an oath to uphold the law, not to decide which laws are just. And I took vows to serve God and help the suffering, Dottie shot back. Sometimes those duties conflict. Not according to the church that's offering a reward for your return. The words hit like a physical blow. Dottie staggered back, her hand pressed to her mouth. A reward. $500. Dead or alive. The church wouldn't. The church didn't post it. Guess who did? Understanding dawned in Dottie's eyes. Thornton. Seems he's been tracking your movements, waiting for you to lead him to something useful. Like a grief-stricken rancher who might be willing to pay handsomely for stolen medicine. Rufus felt the rage building again, hotter this time. He's been using her guilt to set up a trap, get her to steal the medicines, then follow her to potential buyers. Anyone desperate enough to deal with a thief would be desperate enough to sell their land cheap. But I never sold anything, Dottie protested. I gave it all away. Which makes you even more valuable to him. A wanted criminal with a guilty conscience? Perfect leverage against anyone who might help you. The full scope of Thornton's plan became clear. He hadn't just been trying to buy Rufus's land. He'd been trying to frame him as an accomplice to theft. A man facing prison time would sell his ranch for pennies on the dollar. So what happens now? Rufus asked. Alma was quiet for a long moment, studying both their faces. Now I have a choice to make. I can arrest Sister Dottie here for theft and return her to face charges. Or I can investigate reports of cattle rustling that might lead me away from this particular hillside for, the next few hours. You let me go? Dottie's voice was filled with disbelief. I'd give you a choice. Same one you've been giving. Other folks. You can face the consequences of your actions, or you can disappear and never come back to this territory. And if I stay, then you'll hang. Thornton's got enough evidence to convict you 3 times over. Dottie looked at Nellie's grave, then at Rufus. What about your family? What about Levi? I'll manage. Will you? She stepped closer, her voice urgent. Thornton won't stop. He'll find another way to take your land, to threaten your son. And there won't be a sheriff nearby to help next time. But before Rufus could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the valley below. And this time, there were too many riders to count. The riders came like a storm front, at least a dozen men spreading across the valley floor with military precision. Torches blazed in the darkness, casting dancing shadows that made the night feel alive with menace. At their head rode Asa Thornton, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a man in a black suit with a silver badge. That caught the firelight. Territorial Marshal. Alma breathed, her hand moving instinctively to her gun. Thornton brought in federal law. Is that bad? Dottie asked, though her voice already knew the answer. It means there's no place left to run. The marshal's voice boomed across the hillside, amplified by the canyon walls. This is Marshal Wade Garrett. You're surrounded. Come down peaceful, and nobody gets hurt. Rufus felt Dottie's hand slip into his, her fingers cold as Winter Creek water. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant for this to happen. You meant to help people, he said. That's more than most folks can say. Touching, Alma muttered, checking her rifle. But sentiment won't stop bullets. Below them, the riders were forming a circle, cutting off every escape route. Thornton's satisfied laughter drifted up on the night wind. You got 5 minutes to send down the nun, the marshal called. After that, we're coming up. They want me, Dottie said. I should go. No. Rufus surprised himself with the firmness in his voice. You came here to ask my wife's forgiveness. Well, she ain't here to give it. But I am. Rufus, you made a choice 3 years ago. Maybe it was the wrong choice, maybe it wasn't. But you made it out of love. He squeezed her hand. That's more than I can say for the men down there. A new voice cut through the night. Young, frightened, but determined. Papa? Papa, where are you? Rufus's blood turned to ice. Levi? His 8-year-old son stood at the edge of the circle of riders, still in his nightclothes, flanked by 2 of Thornton's men. The boy's dark hair was tousled from sleep, his face streaked with tears. Let the boy go, Thornton, Alma called down. He's got nothing to do with this. He's got everything to do with this, Thornton replied, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a man holding the winning cards. Boy's father is harboring a wanted criminal. That makes him complicit. You bastard, Rufus snarled, starting down the hill. One more step and the boy disappears, Thornton warned. There's a lot of dangerous country between here and Mexico. Easy for a child to get lost. Rufus froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Levi looked so small standing there, so vulnerable. Just like Nellie had looked in those final days when the fever took hold. What do you want? He called down. You know what I want. Your land. Sign the deed over to me, and I'll make sure the boy grows up safe. Refuse, and Thornton shrugged. Well, accidents happen. And the nun? She hangs. Justice must be served. Dottie stepped forward, her voice carrying across the valley with surprising strength. I'll come down. Just let the boy go. Don't be a fool, Alma whispered. The minute you step into that circle, you're dead. Better me than an innocent child. Sister, wait. Rufus caught her arm. There might be another way. What way? He looked at Alma, then at the riders below, then at his son standing brave and terrified in the firelight. How much ammunition you got, Sheriff? Enough. Alma's smile was sharp as a blade. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about what my wife would have wanted. She always said the measure of a man wasn't how he faced easy choices, but how he faced impossible ones. Rufus, no, Dottie pleaded. Don't sacrifice yourself for me. I'm not sacrificing myself for you. I'm fighting for what's right. He checked his Colt, then looked at Alma. You said you took an oath to uphold the law. Well, I'm asking you to uphold it. All of it. Time's up, the marshal called. Send down the nun, or we're coming up shooting. Marshal Garrett, Alma, called back, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd worn a badge for 20 years. I'm Sheriff Alma Lucille, and I'm ordering you to release that child. Taking a minor hostage is a federal crime. The boy's in protective custody. The boy's being used as leverage in an illegal land grab. You can't prove that. Can I? Alma's voice rose. I've got sworn testimony from 3 witnesses who heard Asa Thornton threaten that child's life. That's kidnapping under territorial law. The silence that followed was electric. You can almost feel the tide turning, like watching storm clouds gather before the rain. You're bluffing, Thornton snarled. Maybe, but are you willing to bet your neck on it? Rufus saw his chance. While the attention was focused on Alma, he began working his way down the hill, using the shadows and scrub brush for cover. If he could get close enough to Levi, Papa, don't. Levi's voice cracked with fear. They said they'd hurt you if you came down. Nobody's going to hurt anybody, Rufus called back, still moving. Just stay strong, son. Like your mama taught you. That's when he saw it. A muzzle flash from the rocks above the valley. Then another. And another. Sniper, someone shouted. The night exploded into chaos. Horses reared and screamed. Men dove for cover. Torches scattered across the ground. Like fallen stars. But these weren't random shots. They were precise, calculated, aimed at the riders' weapons rather than the men themselves. Through the confusion, Rufus saw a figure emerge from the rocks. Tall, lean, moving with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. As the figure stepped into the firelight, Rufus's heart nearly stopped. That it was Nellie to know. Not Nellie, but someone who looked enough like her to be her sister, with the same auburn hair and fierce green eyes. She held a rifle with the confidence of someone who'd never missed a shot that mattered. Evening, Asa, she called out, her voice carrying a familiar warmth that made Rufus's chest tighten. Heard you were having a party. Hope you don't mind if I crash it. Thornton's face went white. You're dead. I killed you myself. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, she replied, working the lever of her rifle. But yours are about to become very accurate. The woman's eyes found Rufus across the chaos, and she smiled. The same smile that had haunted his dreams for 3 years. But as the dust settled and the truth began to emerge, Rufus realized that some secrets are too dangerous to stay buried, and some people are too stubborn to stay dead. Rose, Rufus breathed, the name escaping like a prayer. Nellie's sister. The woman with the rifle smiled grimly. Hello, Rufus. Been a long time. Rose McKenna, Nellie's twin sister who disappeared 6 years ago after a dispute with their father. The sister Nellie had grieved for almost as much as her own impending death. The sister who was supposed to be somewhere in California, or dead, or simply gone forever. Impossible. Thornton sputtered, his face white as bone. I saw you fall. Saw you drown in the river. You saw what you wanted to see, Rose replied, never taking her aim off him. But I've always been a strong swimmer. Dottie's sharp intake of breath cut through the night air. The experimental treatment. It wasn't for Nellie, was it? Rose's green eyes flicked to the young nun. Smart girl. No, Sister Dottie, it wasn't for my sister. It was for me. Thornton's boys left me for dead after I found out about his land scheme, but Nellie nursed me back to health. The medicine you gave her? She passed it on to me. The pieces fell together like a house of cards collapsing. Rufus felt his knees threaten to buckle. She died because she gave you her medicine. She died because she chose to save her sister. Instead of herself, Rose said quietly. And because she made me promise to protect you and Levi when she couldn't. Papa. Levi broke free from his captors in the confusion, running toward the hill. Papa, who is that lady? She looks like Mama. Stay down, son, Rufus called, but his voice cracked with emotion. Marshall Garrett stepped forward, his hand on his gun. I don't know who you are, miss, but you're interfering with federal business. I'm Rose McKenna, and this is personal business. She shifted her aim to include the marshal. See, Asa Thornton killed my sister as surely as if he'd shot her himself. Been waiting 3 years for the right moment to settle that debt. You can't prove nothing, Thornton growled, but sweat beaded on his forehead. Can I? Rose reached into her saddlebag with one hand, never lowering her rifle. Got a whole stack of documents here. Forged deeds, falsified medical records, correspondence with certain corrupt officials. Her smile was sharp as winter wind. Amazing what a dead woman can accomplish when nobody's looking for her. Alma Lucille stepped down from the hill, her own weapon drawn. Marshal, I suggest you take a look at those documents. If they prove what I think they prove, we've got ourselves a conspiracy case. This is ridiculous, Thornton blustered. The word of a dead woman and a wanted thief against a respected businessman. The word of two federal witnesses. A new voice corrected. From the shadows stepped another figure, a tall man with silver hair and a badge that caught the moonlight. Behind him came three more federal marshals, their weapons trained on Thornton's men. Marshal James Crawford, territorial investigator, the man announced. We've been tracking this land fraud operation for 8 months. Miss McKenna's been working with us the whole time. The night air seemed to shimmer with revelation. Dottie stared at Rose with something approaching awe. You've been undercover. All this time. All this time, Rose confirmed. Gathering evidence. Building a case. The only thing I couldn't prove was Thornton's connection to the medical supply thefts. Until tonight. You used me, Dottie said, but there was understanding in her voice rather than anger. I gave you a choice. Same choice Nellie gave me, to risk everything to save someone else. Thornton's men were laying down their weapons one by one as the federal marshals moved in. But Thornton himself had one last card to play. Quick as a snake, he grabbed Levi, pressing a derringer to the boy's temple. Everybody back off, or the kid dies. The world went silent except for the sound of Rufus's heart breaking all over again. Levi stood perfectly still, tears streaming down his face, but his chin raised with the same stubborn courage his mother had possessed. Let him go, Asa, Rose said quietly. Your fight's with me. My fight's with anyone who gets in my way. Thornton's eyes were wild now, desperate. I've worked too hard building this empire to lose it all because of some dead woman's ghost. I'm not a ghost, Rose said. I'm justice. You're nothing but. The shot came from an unexpected direction. Not from Rose, not from the marshals, but from Sheriff Alma Lucille, who'd worked her way behind Thornton while everyone's attention was focused forward. Her bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him away from Levi. The boy ran straight into his father's arms. As the marshals secured Thornton and his remaining men, Rose walked slowly toward Rufus and Levi. In the torchlight, the resemblance to Nellie was heartbreaking and comforting all at once. Hello, nephew, she said softly to Levi. I'm your Aunt Rose. Your mama used to tell me stories about you. Are you going to stay? Levi asked, his small hand clutching his father's shirt. Rose looked at Rufus, and he saw 3 years of grief and guilt and hope swirling in those familiar green eyes. That depends on your papa. The land scheme's finished, Marshal Crawford announced. All falsified claims will be returned to their rightful owners. And Miss McKenna's testimony has cleared Sister Dorothea of all charges. Her actions were part of an authorized federal investigation. Dottie sank to her knees beside Nellie's grave, pressing her forehead to the cool marble. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving her. For saving all of us. She saved herself, Rose said. By choosing love over fear. By choosing to trust. As dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, the four of them stood together in the growing light, Rufus and Levi, Rose and Dottie. The silence between them was comfortable now, full of possibility instead of grief. What happens now? Rufus asked. Rose smiled, and for a moment she looked so much like Nellie that his heart skipped. Now we live, the way she would have wanted us to. Dottie stood slowly, brushing dirt from her habit. I should return to the convent. Face whatever consequences remain. Or, Rose said thoughtfully, you could stay. This territory needs a good doctor, and I happen to know where we can get our hands on some proper medical supplies. I'm not a doctor. You saved 17 families with stolen medicine and no formal training. Imagine what you could do with proper resources and legal backing. The sun crested the hills, flooding the valley with golden light. Where shadows had ruled just hours before, wildflowers seemed to shimmer in the new day. Indian paintbrush and lupin, hardy blooms that thrived. In difficult soil, Rufus reached out and took Rose's hand, then Dottie's. Nellie always said that love was like those wildflowers. Seemed impossible that anything beautiful could grow in such hard ground. But given enough hope and the right conditions, it blooms anyway. Rose finished, squeezing his fingers as they walked down the hill together toward a future none of them could have imagined. The sound of Levi's laughter echoed across the valley, bright and clear and full of promise. If this story touched your heart like a prairie sunrise, don't forget to like and share it with folks who appreciate tales of love, justice, and second chances. And be sure to subscribe for more stories from the frontier, where hearts run as wild as the Mustangs. Tell us in the comments below, where are you watching from today? We'd love to hear from fellow travelers on this journey through the wild west of the heart.